comes into Court TV whenever I can beg him to do it, and he's really a smart, bright guest, only to meet his match in Stone Grissom. Stone Grissom is in the other Court TV studio, and Stone comes in from both Missouri and the state of Washington, again doing complex litigation, both civil and criminal. Stone, let me start with you. Since we've just heard the defense theory of the case, boy, this sounds pretty good before you start the evidence.
Yeah, it does sound very good, and that's really what you have to do. I mean, that type of defense, or this type of defense, you want to paint the actual perpetrator as this Black Widow type individual who is spiraling his web around the victim. The problem is that she made a couple of pretty damning statements early on where she basically admitted to the conspiracy, and I think that's something that he's going to have to overcome. It might have been a good idea at that particular time in the opening to really embrace those statements, because that's certainly a hurdle he's going to have to make in this case to convince the jury that, one, this secret organization exists, and two, she didn't tell the police in her two initial statements anything about the threats or intimidation that she's now telling the jury, or now the defense is, for the first time, bringing this out at trial.
Right, indeed. According to her, he's saying, you got to go to bed with me, or something's going to happen to your kids, to your family. You have to do whatever I say. You have to be obedient to me. But you've had a case, not quite like this, but involving an organization. You got to prove that organization up, right?
Yeah, and when you're telling the jury something that there's a secret organization that's out there intimidating this one particular individual, and it's a type of evidence that sounds outlandish just when you first say it, you really need some corroboration. I had a case in Washington actually involving two military personnel accused of killing one of their wives, and our theory of the case as a co-defendant was that there was this paramilitary, covert, unauthorized organization called the Federation. But the difference here is that we actually had some corroborating evidence. We had taped meetings, we had symbols from them, we could point to other members of the organization, and that's one element that you have to show the jury, that this is not just a story of someone trying to get out of a crime, but that this organization does exist. And then you have to embrace that theory. You have to really, I always said to the jury, or afterwards, it's like you know, jumping into the rabbit hole with both feet. When you're going down that tunnel, you have to really explain this and embrace it. Otherwise, the jury doesn't think you really believe it.
Well, let me take another side to it. Stone Grissom, I want to go back to this shooting.
Right.
Here is a man who does not believe that his wife wants to get rid of him. We have Mr. Hunter, who comes into his room, so we know that Hunter at least intends to get rid of him, but somehow there's no way that law enforcement seems to be able to tie these two incidents together. That would disturb me if I'm prosecuting this case.
Well, I think that cuts both ways, actually, because what you have here, and Steve made a good point earlier, is that what the defense needs to do is just really show her state of mind and how she could have deteriorated into this victim status and ultimately kind of been coerced to help kill her husband. But the flip side of that, and I really hate, I cringe taking the prosecution side.
Well,
but
so, you know, we argue both sides on my show. I argue both sides. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the flip side of that is that this state of mind has to be reasonable.
Yes.
And I think that shooting incident, to some degree, helps the prosecution, because you kind of have this prior bad, they don't have to argue anything. It's out there. He got shot earlier. What the prosecution needs now to do is show the lack of any type of action that Abigail did to protect her family, to protect her husband, to make sure that this didn't happen again. But instead, and we haven't gotten to this yet, she makes two very compelling statements to the police in which she flat out says, I agreed to give Mr. Hunter $38,000 to kill my husband. I knew he was going to do it before I went to the hospital that day. So she's driving her husband up to his death, basically. And that's something the defense really is going to have to overcome in this case. So in the shooting, the prior shooting just sits there. And the jury is, no doubt, in the deliberation room going to go back there and say, come on, I mean, she had something to do with the shooting as well, even though no evidence will ever be put forth as to who did this shooting. So I think, to some degree, without even saying anything, that shooting just sits there as a cloud over her head.
I think it is a big cloud. One of them, he's a flirt. He loves telling people he's a flirt. He just can't wait to explain how charming he is as a Lothario, to use that term.
Right.
It's one thing to be a flirt, it's another thing to be a killer. I mean, how do those two things go together?
You know, I was actually just writing myself a note during the break, a bad opening line to admit to being capable of murder right off the bat. Yeah, and I think that that's where the cross is going to come, is that he kind of says it's benign, it's innocuous. I just say those things when I meet women that I can kill their husbands. And
how charming.
Yeah, and very charming. I'm sure he says it with a lot of poise. But I think that's where the cross is going to come in, is to talk about the life, basically the double life is what they're claiming. To talk about how he's a teacher and he masks this ability. And we know he's capable of murder because he attempted it.
There's no doubt. He's the person who's there putting the syringe in the IV.
Right, so I think they want to show that dichotomy in his life, to kind of show this hunter side of him.
Yes, the hunter side. You see from Suzanne, because I think it's interesting about the power of language. In part, she says that the choice of the word dupe, quote-unquote dupe, by the defense attorney in the opening statement may not have been wise, because she looks at dupe, being deceived is different than being coerced due to some nefarious criminal organization. And I think that there is a distinction there. Is she duped by him, or was she terrified that she had to be quote-unquote obedient to him, because otherwise he was going to kill everybody?
Yeah, and I think that that's actually a very good observation, and really goes to the heart of the defense, because I don't think the defense is really claiming that she was duped.
Right.
More that what Steve was saying, that really there was a systematic approach of manipulation and turning her into a victim to where she was obedient and would do whatever he said. And that is, you can, I think, look at these earlier statements she makes to the police and come across credibly and make that argument as well, because she does say a lot of times, I did what I was told. I did what he asked me to do. I called him back when he told me to call him back. And I think that's really what they're trying to say, that there was a systematic deterioration of her emotional state to the point to where she was put in this state of mind, to where she did something that a rational person or a stronger person emotionally would not have done.
Interesting perspective, because amoral individual, amoral, immoral, and yet this plan is really a mess. He is going to go into a hospital room where the gentleman is right by the nurse's station, and that's where he's going to do the deed? I mean, that seems like a high-risk play to me.
It's not the best thought-out plan for a murder, especially when they had apparently all this time to plan it. You know, and I think, you know, his own testimony on direct hurts the prosecution a little bit, because he admits that any type of sexual relationship had ended at this point.
Now, does that make any sense? So then, no more sex. We don't have to get rid of hubby anymore for sex, but, well, $38,000, okay. And then it's show me the money, right?
Right, and then it just turns him into a cold-blooded killer. You know, this becomes now a murder for hire, and he becomes a hitman. And you know, I think that cuts against the prosecution's theory a little bit, because, and it helps the defense to turn him into this manipulator, which is what they're arguing. Now, all of this would be great if we didn't have those statements that she makes to the police.
Yes, it's a little problem. It's called bad fact.
Yeah, I think, and I think the cross for the defense is this is going to be the most important cross of the trial, because you really have to portray this manipulator, bring that side out to the jury. His testimony and Abigail's testimony are going to be the most important aspects for the defense in this case.
Do you try to make him mad if you're cross-examining him?
No, I think what you want to do, and I agree, you want to tie this first shooting into the cross a little bit, because remember, the husband, the victim, said that he had met Mr. Hunter earlier, and this was before the shooting, and that Mr. Hunter had come in and asked about his son, and that goes along with the defense's theory that he was learning as much as he could about their family so that he could use that against the wife and really start to deteriorate her mentally. So you want to show that, you want to emphasize the lack of any sexual relationship that he himself has already admitted, and you want to turn him into that cold-blooded killer, that he was doing this for money, just solely for money. He had a fiance. He was visiting his fiance. He was going to commit a murder the day he was visiting his fiance.
In the hospital.
In the
How
hospital.
charming.
Yeah, well.
Well, what can we say? Stone, I really want to thank you for coming, and it's always a pleasure for me when you and I wind up on the East Coast at the same time.
Absolutely.
I extend my wishes to you for a very, very happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
And come back and visit me again.
I will.
I am